On the programme tonight, the life expectancy of a baby born in Scotland will soon be lower than the worst of the post-industrial societies of East Europe. If it's not just bad diet or smoking or poverty, what is it? Is there a peculiarly Scottish problem, cultural or social, that's doomed the nation to die too young? Good evening. Scotland's reputation as one of the sick men of Europe has taken an unwelcome turn with the publication of a survey comparing health problems here with equivalent problems in other poor post-industrial areas. A team of public health scientists have been comparing data from a variety of European cities and regions. Some are in East Europe, in the former communist countries. Some are in northern France, Belgium and the Netherlands, and some are in England and Northern Ireland. All have suffered deindustrialisation over recent decades. The survey finds similarities and differences, but the bad news for Scots inhabitants is that largely the others are getting better quicker than we are. Julie Peacock has been speaking to one of the report's authors. Well, I'm joined now in the studio by one of the authors of that report, Professor Phil Hanlon of Glasgow University, who you saw in the film there, and also Dr. Carol Craig, who's Chief Executive of the Scottish Centre for Confidence and Wellbeing. And in Edinburgh is the former Health Minister Susan Deakin, now Professor of Social Change at Queen Margaret University. Professor Hanlon, so at the end of this report, and it is a weighty report, you still don't really know what's wrong with Scotland. Is that right? That's fundamentally right. You've got to put it in its historical context. A number of years ago, we discovered that Scotland's health, although improving, was improving more slowly than other parts of Europe. And the answer that was given primarily at that point was that, well, Scotland has more deprivation. So the logical thing to do, and David Walsh at the Glasgow Centre for Population Health has been central to this and is one of the lead authors here, he drew out information from these 20 regions and looked at these death rates and came up with this extraordinary finding, because to be honest, beforehand we would have predicted that Scotland would be somewhere in the middle of the pack. And so the next phase of research now is going to look at 3 or 4 regions in much more detail, and we'll start to try and unpick which of these things. Is it still poverty? Is it lifestyle? Or is it something about the psyche or the society that's at play? There's something. I mean, is there any hint really from what you've got as to what that could be? We've got lots of theories. Indeed, we postulate on 7 or 8 different ones. But until we get more information, we will not be able to say with certainty tonight. But it is important that we have a debate in Scotland about this, because, as I say, I think there has almost been a laziness which says, well, you can't expect more of Scotland. Well, I suspect this report tells us we can expect more of Scotland. If countries that have gone through the bumpy ride of the fall of communism and have half the income of our own society are now outstripping us, that's a challenge to us to do much better. Well, Susan Deakin, as a former health minister and a member of the Labour Party who's run the UK since 1997, you must be rather depressed by this to hear that the policies haven't been working.
No, I think this is a very important, a very significant report, and I really think that we need to have a quantum shift in the whole way that we think about and act upon the health and well-being of our people. I have no difficulty with any of the analysis that Phil Hanlon's just articulated, and indeed have been party to much discussion of this nature over the years, and I truly believe that we have to move on from thinking that it's all just about poverty and deprivation, albeit that that's a hugely significant issue, or for that matter, that the solution lies in yet another top-down government initiative.
But it does
and a big
suggest
wad of
policies
public money.
haven't worked, doesn't it?
Well, I think the important thing is that we have a better understanding now than we have ever had about some of the patterns of behaviour that lead to some of the problems and the health status that we have in our population. What we don't understand is quite why these behaviours are as they are. And I think we need to think much more widely about some of the deeper-rooted social and cultural issues that affect us as a nation. And actually, even just the very way that we talk about these issues, I think we need to raise the game a bit and have a far more hopeful, more positive, more aspirational view of ourselves and what we can achieve. Frankly, if we continue to describe ourselves as the sick man of Europe, there's even an extent to which I think that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy about how we feel about ourselves and how we conduct ourselves.
OK, well, I'll take the blame for that, for writing the introduction, but I'll not take the blame for everything, if you excuse me. Carol Craig, presumably you would agree with that. Is there something particularly fatalistic in the culture here that, I don't know, by accepting the blame, you absolve yourself of responsibility for it?
Well, I think there's a kind of we're doomed, which I think partly came across in your introduction as well. And I think we get this...
blame for it all here,
but we get a lot of this in Scotland. You're from England as well. You're not even Scottish from that point of view. But I do think there is something about Scotland that is deeply pessimistic, and I think this is part of the issue, because there's now really very good research that's been done internationally that links feelings of pessimism with ill health, and just on a day-by-day basis, if you have no
How?
hope.
What's the mechanism?
Well, I think Phil, as the medical person, could explain that better than me. I don't know whether you would like to come in at this point.
Can you make a suggestion?
Yes, I mean, there's this lovely word, psychoneuroimmunology, you know, and when we feel down, we activate parts of our brain that go along with that, and that has effects on our physiology, that upregulates our stress hormones and so on. And so there's undoubtedly a mechanism that's physiological and individual. There's also a social mechanism which suggests that if you're at the wrong end of pecking orders in the workplace or elsewhere, that can have profound effects as well. So there are mechanisms. Well, I think that's the issue. You see, I think one of the things that we have shown is that the factors that Susan's alluded to operate everywhere. So smoking and alcohol are important. These stress issues are important. These issues of pessimism. So I think that the clue here is that we've got something going in our society which makes us more vulnerable. And it's unlikely to be one thing. You know, I say to my students, if someone comes along and says the one thing that's causing this, don't listen.
Yes.
Yeah, because this is much more complicated.
It's a mixture, and sometimes it takes an outsider to kind of shine the light to some extent. I remember speaking to this woman from Taiwan who was living here. She'd been in China, and she said, I think Scotland's a fantastic culture. She said, but the thing that I find really, really sad is your poor people. She said, your poor people feel worthless and they have no hope. Our poor people are just poor. And that is, I think, something about Scotland, that there's a worthlessness that I think runs quite deep for people within our culture. It's a very judgmental, it's quite a harsh culture. It can be very negative. And I think that can be true for lots of people in Scotland, but it seems to be particularly toxic for the people who are at the bottom of the pile. On top of that, I would say that what people are doing in a well-meaning way to try and counteract that is actually making it worse. Because I think people, if they're repeatedly told that they're deprived, that they're hard done by, it actually makes them feel worse. So I think we're making it worse by the good-natured, well-meaning things that we're doing.
Susan Deakin, I know you visited Finland at the North Karelia project, and the director of that was quoted in a Sunday newspaper as saying there that Scotland knows what they have to do. It's a question of leadership. You have now it is time to help people make the healthier choices. And they managed to change their cardiovascular rates by 73%. How did they do it there? How did they convince people to get on this positive spiral, as it were?
Well, the thing that screamed out at me when I visited Finland and spent some time looking at what they'd done was that it wasn't just a government initiative or a government campaign. There was a real shared collective effort to change practice, to change behaviour.
Among
so
whom?
you had
Sorry,
employers.
among whom? Who's sharing here?
You had employers involved, you had schools, not just schools in the sense of a policy that was being passed down to them from government, but actually leadership at a local level to bring about change in things like diet and nutrition and so on. And I don't think we've got that yet in Scotland. In fact, my own view, my own experience, and having spent the first 2 sessions of the Scottish Parliament as a member of it, is that one of the unintended consequences of devolution in Scotland has been that we've actually spawned a new dependency culture, that the whole way that we debate these issues, and when I say we, I don't just mean politicians, I mean all those involved in this, whether it be in the media, people working in education, health or whatever, the way that we debate these issues is predicated in some notion that if we simply get the right government strategy in place, all will be well. When in fact what we need to do is, and this is where I have some sympathy with the quote there that you cited, what we need to do, I think,